Welcome back, everyone, to Entrepreneur's Life. I'm super excited to have you back, and I am super excited about the guest that I can bring to you today, Sean Mulkeen. How are you doing, Sean?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Very well. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure having you here. You call yourself a dinosaur in the performance marketing industry. You've been building businesses for about 20 years now. I'm very much looking forward to hear a bit more about your story and, well, dive into a bit of the darker, ugly side of entrepreneurship and why
Mhm.
that is cool or not. We'll find out. so
Sure.
uh,
Sounds good.
maybe we kick off with a little bit of your story when you were an early founder. So I guess that's like 15, 20 years ago.
Yes. So first company I founded was an email brokering company. When you were still allowed to do that in the space, that was a result of figuring out what my last official employer did, and then decided to do it on my own. So I did that back in Chicago. Started back in 2002. Did that for about 9 years, but it was very well 9 years. Did it about for about 7 years, but it was very North American focused. I got lucky with a couple of clients that kind of put me on the map. And then, like most entrepreneurs, kind of got bored, dull, wanted to do something different, and I kind of had a wanderlust factor in me that was a little higher than others. So I wanted to do something that was international, and that's what led me to co-founding the network with my old business partner, and the reason that I live in the Netherlands today. So uh, that took me up towards about 2018, and then once again, want to do something different, and yeah, have been consulting since.
That's pretty cool. So you did start a number of ventures, right? But you also built one company for about a decade, right? So
Yeah.
let's dive into that. It's an interesting story because I believe you started it and then actually after just like a year or two, quite early in the game, you did already sell the company, but you stayed with the company. So that's a different model to what people imagine when they start something. How did that come about?
Yeah. So we had started the company kind of as the anti-network to the space. As other dinosaurs in the space, they'll realize that most of the space was all doing the same exact thing. But in Europe, that type of model was a little bit behind the times. So we decided to introduce a US financial model into a European attitude. That was kind of our spin on things. So we would pay people faster, but not be as strict, and maybe not be as well. We were definitely weren't as structured because it was just two of us sitting on couches on different continents. We started it during the last housing crash or the last kind of economic downturn in 2009. So once we started growing, which we wanted it to grow, but didn't realize it was going to grow so fast, we kind of were in a pinch because explaining to a bank back then what we were doing was impossible, let alone explaining to anybody really what we were doing was impossible.
Hold on, let me
Uh,
let me interrupt here because some people who are watching this they might not be from the performance marketing space. So when you say
sure.
network, what do you
Yeah.
actually mean? What did you do?
Yeah, it was an advertising network. There's hundreds of them out there. But as I said, we took a different approach because more of the scalable networks and the networks that had tons of verticals, they were all very much US based. And we just didn't really like the way that networks were doing business. We want to do something different, focus on different verticals. So we started off as a gaming network. Um, our first big client and our first big break was brokering stuff for EA Sports.
Okay.
Uh, and that kind of put us on the map. People remember advertisers like Pogo when you used to be able to install a game just to do Hangman on Facebook. Uh, that was us back then, and we did very well with that. But again, we were bootstrapped, and we didn't think it was going to grow as fast as it was going to grow. So we kind of came to a conclusion that we either had to close the company because we just couldn't keep up, or we needed to look for somebody to help us out, and it couldn't be a bank. Um, and just through a few connections in the Netherlands, we happened to come upon a company that was looking for a performance department. We had one meeting with them, and within 3 weeks, they decided to buy us. And 6 weeks later, I was living in Europe. Um, it was it was a roller coaster. We didn't really take it that seriously at the beginning. I didn't even move to the town where the company was. I decided to live in Amsterdam instead of The Hague. I probably went down to the office once a week for the first 3 to 6 months because I really didn't really think it was serious. I was kind of taking it as a free ride. I'll live in Europe for a couple of years, then I'll go back to the States.
Right.
After about 6 months, we realized that that was not going to be the case, and things were growing even faster. We hired one employee, and in the first full year, once we were taken over, I think the company went up 5 to 10x. So it was exciting. We were dealing with verticals that aren't really allowed on Facebook anymore. So we were kind of taking a chance, but it was exciting. It was exciting nonetheless that what we were doing was working.
Very interesting. Okay. And so you took money. Did you also integrate different leadership, or how did that work? Because one of the challenges that I see a lot of founders have is they start a business because they want to have the freedom, right? And they want to do things their way. No,
Yeah,
now, obviously, if you give equity in the company to somebody else, sometimes they
yeah,
want to make the rules as well. So,
yeah.
how was that in your case, and how did you deal with that?
Yeah, during this time, we didn't have any integration from the company that got involved. So we were still working completely autonomous. It was more of a giving us a credit line in order for the business to grow as in trade for the equity. Um, we were still only two people until probably 6 months after that happened. And in the first year, we only hired two people.
Right.
So up until 2012, we were just a company of four. We had a couple of interns in the Netherlands that were, I guess, leased to us from the bigger company. We eventually hired them as well, and a couple of them are actually still in the space. And then the true growth started to happen in 12 and 13, and we eventually got up to about 35 people,
Right.
with half the company sitting in an office in Los Angeles.
Okay. Interesting. All right.
Yeah, yeah.
So what happened then? So you built a company up to like 35, 40 people, as you mentioned, right? I don't
Yep.
know if you can share anything about the like revenue it did or anything in that regard. But tell me what happened then, because you did exit from the company afterwards, right?
Yeah, yeah. So we were one of three arms of the main company. There was a search arm, a performance arm, and then a Google services arm. Um, we were the revenue runners of the group. We also were probably the highest risk part of the group, as most affiliates angles are. But it continued to grow. But then we realized the group that had taken us over had already been around for almost 10 years when they got involved with us. So by the time 15 years was coming around, it was kind of decided that we need to make a move. We either need to sell the company or go acquire some companies for multiple reasons. Keeping the higher staff, the C-level interested, showing that showing the whole company that we are going somewhere rather than just being stagnant. And then it actually ended up the reverse. One of our clients became interested in us, and probably after about a year of DD, in end of 2015, the whole group was acquired.
Right.
Um, so we kind of all looked at each other at that point and said, this is either going to work really well or not. We really had no idea because it was a Google partner that actually took over the whole group, and we had nothing to do with Google. Our arm of
Huh.
the business was 100% Facebook related.
Right.
Um, so it was definitely a gamble, but we were given some pretty hard handcuffs once we were acquired, and we kind of made some internal bets to see how many of the five people who were really there from the beginning would be there by the end of the handcuffs.
Right.
And only one was there by the end of the handcuffs. So
Okay.
um, it wasn't a huge shock, but obviously, as things grow and more people get involved, harder decisions have to be made. So
Right.
it's just part of business. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. All right. And then you stayed with the company for a little bit, I assume,
Yes,
in the US.
yeah. Stayed with the group for 2 of the 3 years,
Right.
and then yeah, the the business that I had originally co-founded wasn't really following the path of the rest of the group. We kind of were becoming more of a little bit of an asterisk, or an extra revenue stream rather than being the focal point of what the group wanted to do going forward. So luckily, we were able to close the division, pay everybody, have all still good relations with advertisers, and we were able to move a lot of the staff into different divisions of the company. Um, it was more important for me at that point to make sure that everybody had a next step
Right.
because nothing was happening due to any of them. So either find them new gigs with competitors, that was some interesting conversations to have, or move them to different internal positions within the group if they wanted to stick around.
Right. Right.
So we were able to close actually quite cleanly, and other ad networks out there will appreciate that how rare that is nowadays.
Yeah, it's true.
Um, once the last payment was made, and once the last payment came in from an advertiser, I walked out of the office probably 2 hours later, and that was it. Um,
Very
yeah.
interesting because you're one of the rarer cases that I've seen where you did like the entire journey, and that's like over 10 years, right? If I
Mhm.
got that correctly. From
Mhm.
founding the company, then different stages of like being acquired and working with like other equity partners and so forth until you
Mhm.
actually did close the company, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
moved on to something else, right? And now, of course, you have all that experience and you advise and you got yourself chicks, but it's very nice to see that like a full circle. So very very interesting. So let's dive into different phases or maybe some of the highlights that you remember. So what was like one of the hardest things that you had to do in that 10-year time span as an entrepreneur?
The hardest thing was telling the company at the end that we were going to close, and we had an actually hard close date. Um, that was extremely difficult, and most of the decisions were coming from a board level rather than an individual level. So it was kind of out of control, and that kind of it got away from the ethos of what we originally had the company started as. Whereas my old business partner and I had full control of everything, but then once again, all these different parties get involved, you only have part of the decision making power, not all of it anymore. So that was difficult in telling people that it was going to come to an end because uh, the network had been around 9, 10 years, and we had a couple of people that were involved with us that had been there almost for the full ride. So it was the end of a chapter. It was quite sad, uh, but life goes on. Other difficult business decisions than that, there wasn't many things that were too difficult about it. Stressful maybe, but not difficult. Um, I did a lot of dirty work behind the scenes to make sure everything ran smooth from a superficial standpoint of the company, and wanted everybody just to worry about themselves, do their job, make as much money as they can, etc. If there were any problems, throw them over the fence and let me deal with them. Uh, and that got me
All
in.
right, I have to jump in here. What's
Yeah.
what's the dirty stuff? What are we talking about?
Oh, well, I was well, collections agencies in every country around the world are very different, and they work on different levels of aggression. Um, Safe to say, the one in the Netherlands was maybe at an aggression of 3, and I was at an aggression of 30. Um,
Okay.
so there's some pretty good stories, and when I would say I would go collect, I would actually go collect. I wasn't the guy who just would send an email or have phone calls or threaten a lawyer. I would actually get on a plane and show up at your door. And that got me into some sticky situations a couple times. Um, and now looking back, 10 years later after I did them, I wouldn't do them now, mostly because now I have kids. But back then, it seemed like the best case scenario to do it that way. And the success rate on it was probably about 50-50. Um, but the stories that came out of it were definitely, they were worth it. Um, yeah. So
tell me, pick one of the stories that you can share here publicly. Pick one of the stories and tell me more about it.
Uh, the only one that I can, well, full details. We worked with a penny auction advertisers were very big. Probably about 10 years ago. I can't actually remember the name of the advertiser, but they were based out of
Penny
Malta.
auction, is that like, is that like the Wolf of Wall Street kind of
No,
kind of stuff?
penny auctions were that model where, say, they would put a new computer up and say it's 1 penny, but then and then it'd say you'd win it for 1 penny as long as nobody would bid within a minute, and it would just keep going and keep
Okay.
going and keep going. But the only amount of money out of your wallet would actually be a penny. So you could have the computer could actually sell for 5,000 euros when it was only worth 1,000, but you only paid a penny for it. Um, I guess it was legal and it worked, but the actual foundation of what was happening wasn't that great. Um, anyway, we were doing quite a bit of volume with them, and we were due payments, and it didn't come. And then I talked to my contact there, and he said the whole company had closed shop and disappeared
Uh,
overnight. So
uh.
that didn't seem right. Uh, and um, I decided that something wasn't sitting right. So I said, "Well, I'm going to come down to Malta because I actually was going down on a little holiday with my wife and my newborn." So I said, well, "Why don't we try to go find one of the founders?" And we found out that one of the owners of the company was a lawyer at a firm in Malta. So I said I would just show up at the law firm unannounced. He didn't think that was the best idea, but obviously he didn't hang out. He
Wonder
didn't
why.
hang out with me much. Yeah. So I showed up at the law firm. I didn't even know what the woman looked like. She was walking down the stairs. He kind of elbowed me and said, "That's her." I said, "Hey," whatever her name was. She turned around, said, "Can I help you?" And I told her my name. Her face went white pretty quick. And she said, "Okay, come with me. We'll go talk in my office." So I go inside and I immediately scan everything. And I'm looking around. I see a lot of Russian on the walls. And I was like, "Well, I wonder, that's interesting because I guess her name is kind of Russian." We sat down and then she left the room for a minute and he immediately knew. He's like, "This is a Russian law firm." I said, "Okay, but it's a law firm. That's fine." So she came in and we were going back and forth with some matters. And I said, "We're here to collect. We know you're one of the owners." And she was kind of denying that. But I had a friend who actually had worked in the Maltese government who was able to pull some documents to prove that she was a owner of the company before I had arrived. She was shocked that I had that information, so that kind of moved the table a little bit. And then she left again, and and then she sent in a couple of guys that looked like the Mountain from Game of Thrones.
Shit.
They didn't say anything, but my friend was like, "We should probably leave."
Right.
So they escorted us out, and we left. And then he's like, "Well, I guess nothing's going to happen." So we went back to his car, and he was about to drive me back to my hotel because I had to catch a flight.
Right.
But then I saw her running out of the law firm. I said, "Well, she's leaving anyway. She was leaving. We interrupted her. She was going to leave. Let's just see where she's going." And he thought that was a little odd. I said, "It's a small island. Like she can't go that far. But let's just where she was going."
Right. Right.
So she was leaving and she was driving towards the airport. I was like, "Oh, she's going to catch a flight." But then a fence had opened up at the end of Valletta's airport, and she was hopping a private jet. Um, so I was like, "Okay, well, we can't go in there." And then immediately 10 police cars had surrounded the jet and had arrested her. So I immediately looked at my friend. I said, "Get me back to the hotel. I got to get out of here quick. And I have
Yeah.
to get out of here before I have to get out of here before I tell my wife what I was doing for the last hour." Um, so I left, and then it found out that she ended up getting arrested and deported. But the main guy who had taken all the money had left a couple weeks earlier and had flown to Monaco, and he was under the protection of Monegasque law.
Oh wow.
Uh, and again, we were kind of risk takers back then, so I actually called the only, I guess it was the only newspaper in Monaco, and told them I wanted to take out an ad on one of their residents. uh, but that was actually against the law there. No slandering, anything against anybody in Monaco. Shocker. And that was that. I never heard from any of them ever again. Doesn't have much of an online profile. But hindsight 2020, I probably would have done that again because maybe we wouldn't have left the Russian law firm. But it was a good story once I was on the commercial flight back to the Netherlands.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's a good
yeah,
story, man. That's a good story. I'm sure
yeah,
you would have plenty others of those, but I guess it shows how different of an approach you can take when you are an entrepreneur, because most people would probably not want to get themselves into something crazy like this. But there's always the dirty side of doing a business, right? And you
yeah,
were working in a space back then that probably had more black sheep than others, right?
yeah,
But I'm just happy that you got out of this in life.
yeah,
You never saw
yeah.
the money though, right?
Never saw the money from that one. Um, most of the riskier visits I made, and some of them I made with other people in the affiliate industry, never saw any funds from. But there were plenty. I collected once at a DM Expo conference. Walked right up to an advertiser who was having a meeting with a new client and just sat down at the meeting until they paid me. Um, Not the most professional thing to do, especially in Germany, but it worked. And I'm still friends with the guy now today, but at the time it was kind of odd, but it worked. Yeah.
I love that. So one thing I know, I mean, I have a lot of friends around the world, but you would definitely be one of my first guys to call if I ever need somebody to collect money for me. So that's a very important skill that you have there. Thank you very much for sharing that. You might have some people call you up after the show here and ask you for a very special
Good to
service.
know. Yeah, good to know.
No, we're over time already, but I do want to dive into one more subject that you deal with a lot as well, and did back then in the day, which is business development. And I feel that
Hmm.
business development is something that by most entrepreneurs might not be appreciated enough. But of course, business development is the thing that gets a company running, that pays the
Hmm.
bills in many ways. So maybe you can share like 2 or 3 of your top tips based on your experience when it comes to business development and doing it correctly.
Yeah, yeah. Business development is definitely what has always driven me. I think it's my biggest forte. Uh, yeah, tips for business development. I al- Nothing ever ends. I never have an end with business development, depending on the client that I'm working with now or when I was trying to build stuff up back then. Um, I always kind of hit things in mass because there is a human element on the other side of the business you're trying to create, and nobody wants to be bothered, nonstop. So I always kind of try to hit 20 companies at once instead of one company, and then naturally those companies will come back to you. Business development takes a lot of patience. Back then, you know, depending on the type of offers you were trying to build up, you could talk to a company at 9 o'clock in the morning, have contracts by noon, and be live by 3. Uh, I'm sure that still does exist, but when everyone has now moved into D2C and bigger white hat verticals, etc., nothing moves that fast. We all wish it did, but it doesn't. But the same tactics for finding the companies and how you should approach these companies on doing business, it's exactly the same. Um, my biggest challenge is always trying to find the companies that don't know that they have opportunity and then show the opportunity to them. That's difficult with a lot of people, and definitely difficult as you get older, and maybe more difficult to accept as you get older that you definitely don't know everything. But then trying to tell somebody that they don't know everything, that definitely gets more difficult as everyone gets older. But once they see it, then the business development uh, based off that one client becomes easier because then they'll share your name. It'll push out. You've seen what's successful, so then you can use that almost as your own internal case study to push out to more clients that you feel that have the same opportunity. And that's kind of how I approach things now.
That's pretty cool. Okay. One more question, based on your experience. So, I guess business development and doing it successfully in the way you just described is one of the core skills, say, that a successful entrepreneur needs. Share another trait that a successful entrepreneur should have.
Thick skin. uh, Too many people get offended by too many things too easily. You have to. I mean, we all know it. Entrepreneurs are a different breed or a different sauce. And the majority of people could never put up with the amount of BS that we put up with to try to get something successful. I think having a thick skin and having eyes that can stay open 18 hours a day helps a lot too. But yeah, having a thick skin and not being bothered by the little things.
Fantastic. I think you're 100% right with this. Thank you very much. We're out of time. That was fascinating. One of the best stories I've heard on the podcast yet. Thank you very much for being open, being raw. That's exactly how we want it. Anybody watching this now, please, if you want more crazy stories and amazing entrepreneurs like Sean, if you want to listen to their stories and learn from them, then please follow my channels. We'll bring people not exactly like Sean, but other great entrepreneurs on this show every day. Thank you, Sean Mulkeen, for spending a little bit of time with us here. I definitely had a great time and learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Phil.
Goodbye, guys. Thank you.